All right, welcome everyone to today's webinar, an introduction into all things life cycle. My name is Philipp Strohmann and I'm co-founder and CFO of the Forum for Sustainability through Lifecycle Innovation. I'm really happy to welcome one of our board members, Jody Bricu, today to share with us this introduction on all things life cycle, and I'm really thankful for Jody in taking up this task, because Jody is sitting in Australia and it's pretty late in the evening or night where she is, so I'm really happy that she has taken over the task to share her insights with everybody here today. Before we start, just so you know how this is going to work, Jody will present an overview over her presentation, essentially, during which everyone will be muted. The presentation is going to be around half an hour, 35 minutes, and so afterwards you will have a chance to ask questions. Depending on how many people we are, I might either unmute you if you have a question, or I'll ask you to use the chat functionality, and then I will moderate essentially the questions and have Jody answer. With that said, Jody, thanks again for hosting our webinar today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Philip. Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's 9:30 at night here in Australia, so I'm fresh as a daisy, and I'm really excited about giving this webinar on all things life cycle. So to start off, my director loves talking about life cycle thinking as taking the little blue pill in the matrix. Once you've had the vision of how things fit together and how it works, you see everything so differently. Personally, I didn't learn about life cycle assessment or life cycle thinking at university. I did environmental engineering, so it was very much technology-based, chemistry, very spatial understanding of how environmental impact worked. And I was always very interested in how companies can use environmental information in their strategies. So when I discovered how LCA worked and things around life cycle thinking, it was quite a revolution for me in terms of fitting in environmental solutions to understanding problems more globally. So get ready to take the blue pill for those of you who aren't already into life cycle. So if we start with life cycle assessment, you need to think about life cycle assessment as taking a photo. It's taking a photo of the environmental impact that a product or service has across all life cycle stages. So that's the first important concept, that you're picking up a cup in front of you and it's not just the impact of that cup.
Hold on, Jody, for a sec. I got one comment that people can't hear you good. Is that the same for everyone, or is it just for Julia? Just checking, because I can hear Jody fine, but the question is whether the rest is hearing her.
Hello?
Could you maybe just quickly, one or two people on the webinar, just type into the chat whether you can hear her?
Oh, gosh. Can they hear you okay?
Okay, can you guys hear me fine? Okay, so people can hear me, but not really Jody. Huh. This is weird, because I can hear you fine, Jody. Yeah, let's see.
Is that any better?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this sounds good, I think. Can you try again?
You're the only one that can hear me. Okay.
Okay, this seems to be better.
I'm going to try to press my head against the screen and focus on the screen at the same time.
Okay, wonderful.
I won't go through my matrix spiel again. That's okay. So the importance of this slide is understanding that impacts are coming from across all life cycle stages. So if you pick up a cup in front of you, I'm picking up a cup because I've just had my cup of tea, it's understanding what materials went into that cup at the beginning of its life, how that cup was manufactured, how it got to you, how it was marketed, did it come offline, was it retailed, was it kept in a fridge at retail, then through to product use and consumption. Are we, so if I'm comparing that cup to a disposable cup, it might be the washing of the cup rather than just chucking it out. And then the end of life of that cup. So can that be recycled, yes or no? Is it going to landfill? That depends on what country that cup is coming from, etc. So you need, the first trick of life cycle thinking is to look at a product or service and really think through the supply chain of that product or service. And that's an exercise in and of itself, even before you start trying to quantify the impact. So how did this product get here, and what processes has it been through to do that? And then, oh, why is it not clicking? Okay, I apologize for that. So once we've understand and we've plotted out the supply chain, and that's basically what's happening in the economy, right? So we understand how that product is getting to us and all the different steps. Then we need to plot out, so what's going into that product? What soil and groundwater is being used? For example, if we're talking about a food product, you know, the mineral resources, the energy resources, the land. So you have to make an inventory of everything that's coming into that product, and then also everything that's going out. Are there toxins going out during the manufacture? Are there certain pollutants or wastewater, carbon dioxide, etc.? So it's really understanding the interaction between a supply chain and nature, really. And then once we have that inventory of what's going in and out, that needs to be converted into different impacts. So how do we translate you know, information about kilograms of plastic into something that actually interests us, what the actual impact on the environment is? And then the result that we get when we do an LCA, this is another important concept, it's multi-criteria. So we're not just looking at carbon. A carbon footprint is a subset of life cycle thinking in LCA. It's really understanding the trade-offs between different environmental impacts. It can be, you know, the difference between land and carbon, for example, or water and mineral and fossil fuels. In this example with a cavity clay wall brick, we can see, and if the results are going up to the top line, that's 100% of the impact. You actually want your impact to be smaller, right? So the cavity clay brick wall is scoring better on land use and water use, but the concrete block wall is scoring better on global warming impacts and eutrophication. So you have to be able to balance those things out to make an informed decision. There are a few important standards for LCA, which we won't go into, but it's just so that you've got them in the slide deck and that you understand that this is a science that is standardized. There are real ways to calculate this stuff, so it is something that you can trust. There are still some kind of cowboy life cycle assessments out there, but generally, you know, in the sort of 1980s, 1990s, there were some studies coming out that you could really question the results. Today, if a life cycle assessment has been peer-reviewed, it's recognised, you can be fairly confident in the results. Oh, sorry. Is that any better, Julia? No? I apologise for these technical problems.
I'm not sure I'm not sure it's on your end, because I can technically hear you fine. I mean, there's a little bit of a whistle in the background, but I can hear you fine. And if I can hear you fine,
okay.
I'm not sure there's what we can do about it. Yeah, Julia, why not do that? That's a good idea.
Oh, sorry. Oh, Julia will? Okay. How's everyone else going?
Can the rest of you guys online, can you guys hear Jody? Okay, I don't know. Jody, continue for the time being.
I love it that it's the class that's evaluating the importance of weather. Yeah, great. So sometimes this life cycle thinking and the results that come from these life cycle assessments can have some quite surprising results that challenge the way we think of things. So, for example, what do you guys think is most important about a fridge? Where is the environmental impact coming from for a fridge? Would it be in the construction materials, in the plastics and the metals and things like that? Would it be the refrigerants that are used in the refrigerator, energy use during its lifetime, or waste at the end of life? I'll just give you a little bit of thinking. So just have a think of, look at your fridge and where do you think the environmental impacts would come from the fridge? So if we look at typical household expenditure data from ABS and look at the real impacts of the fridge, it's actually what's being held inside the fridge. It's and predominantly the meat, which has a quite high life cycle assessment. So sometimes you do these studies and you're not actually thinking about what's by far the most important part of it. The same can be said, we always use the example of a toaster. You've got all your operating stuff, but by far the biggest environmental impact of a toaster is burnt toast. If you're throwing out one piece of toast out of every 10 you're putting in, that is a gigantic environmental impact. So sometimes it can really question how you think about some environmental problems. Now, another aspect that's really important about life cycle assessment is that it's all about function. So it's based around a comparison of alternative ways to provide a defined functional unit, a function or a service. So if you want to compare, well, I'll go through the plastic bag example after, but this is really important when we look after it at how we think about life cycle. Sorry, I'm flustered with this, the technical problems. I apologise again. So this is important because the first thing you do in life cycle assessment is think, why do we need this thing? So you're not comparing, a chair and a table. It's what function does this chair deliver and how can we deliver it in different ways, which is a really important question to ask, for example. If you want to redesign a chair or redesign the product, you're really trying to cull it back and understand what is the service that product is delivering. So you need to think about substitutable comparisons on this as well. So a functional unit, it always has units. We'll see an example just afterwards. Preferably framed around delivery of a specific service rather than the product itself. So one chair isn't very useful. It's more around, the number of hours that people are sitting or a weight, things like that. A basis for comparison of alternatives. So you need to have something, if you're trying to compare different types of buildings, you're not just comparing an office block to a residential building. You're trying to compare something that actually makes sense. And it doesn't include environmental indicators in and of itself. So you're not comparing an environmentally friendly bag to a non-environmentally friendly bag. You're comparing the function that bag is delivering. And then the reference flow, what is required in physical terms to deliver the functional unit. So it becomes a lot more concrete when you see an example. But if we think about bags, so here where I am in South Australia in the 1990s, we banned single-use plastic bags from supermarkets, for example. Now, to actually understand the science behind that policy, there was LCAs done of all different bag examples. So from bags that you could reuse many, many times to paper bags and biodegradable bags and things like that. But you can't just compare a cotton reusable bag to a paper bag in and of itself, because a cotton reusable bag you're going to use 100 times, whereas a paper bag you're only going to use it once. So you need to look at the primary function, so to contain groceries or purchase items and allow them to be carried from point of sale to point of use. If the bag breaks, it's not a good bag. Stop. And then there's also secondary functions that you may or may not consider during your analysis. So the reusability of the bags and also advertising. The bags are often used as advertising points for retailers. So the reference flow used for the study was a household carrying approximately 70 grocery items home from a supermarket each week for 52 weeks. So it's a very precise comparison. And then you calculate that back to the number of plastic bags, degradable bags, or refillable bags. And then you're comparing apples with apples and not apples with oranges. So the two big key things so far has been understanding the life cycle supply chain of a product and really understanding what function that product has for you before you get into any kind of developing results. Right, so now that you've got a photograph, you've understood, you've mapped your supply chain, you've understood the function of your product, you've done your analysis, and you can see environmental impacts of your product. Now's the time to take action. So this is where it really gets interesting. The main thing I'm going to talk about is action in terms of communicating environmental performance. So one way to communicate the environmental performance once you've actually analysed your product is through an environmental product declaration. Now these EPDs are fairly complex looking documents and they're for business to business communication. This EnviroDec is the international EPD system, but there's also a comparable EPD system in France. There's a quite complete database around building materials that has several hundred building materials, all compared the different environmental impacts of those building materials. In Australasia, we have our own EPD system. So depending where you are in the world, you can find quite detailed information about certain products in terms of their carbon footprint and their water use and their eutrophication and all sorts of quite detailed environmental data on these products. But then how can that be used at a consumer level? So a couple of years ago in France, there was a quite detailed experiment that went on over 2 years looking at how to communicate multi-criteria environmental information to consumers. It's hard enough for consumers to sort of get around price and price per litre and things like that, but how can they actually communicate environmental impacts to a consumer in a reasonable way? So this is a hardware store in France that tested a couple of different examples. So for their paint example, on the shelf, they gave it an overall rating system, like you can see the A in the leaf, which doesn't look very life cycle assessment-like because you're not seeing the balance between different indicators. But then, once you got online, you had all the details that sat behind that. So you can see this top one is changement climatique, that's climate change, and then resource use, water pollution, some air pollution, and sorry, can't read that right now. So the idea is that a consumer that wants to really understand the product that they're buying and compare it with others can actually scratch the surface, go online and understand the balance between those different environmental impacts before they make their purchase choice. Another example was backpacks, and this information was available online to everyone. So you got 3 indicators, and this example only shows, you know, them scoring A everywhere, but there were examples online where there were things scoring C's and D's, so you could see quite clearly what were the better backpacks and what weren't. And also really interesting, a lot of the companies put a lot of money into making videos and guides and things like that to explain life cycle thinking to consumers. This one I loved because it was Levi's jeans. And they actually took a really interesting aspect, trying to educate the consumer about what part of the environmental impact of the jeans kind of belonged to Levi's and what part of the environmental impact of the jeans belonged to us as consumers. Because the use phase for jeans is really important. It's basically as we're washing it that we're causing a lot of environmental degradation. So it's important for them to communicate to us as consumers that, you know, Levi's can try to make the most ecologically friendly pair of jeans that they want, if we take them home and wash them every single wear with very hot water, we're going to be the ones that make all the environmental impact. So having that life cycle approach can also mean that you can communicate with your clients in a really different way and have a more sophisticated conversation around environmental impact. I did a quick search online because I wanted to see if there still is a lot of results from environmental assessments, life cycle assessments being used, right here and now, or is it all finished? So just literally today I went through and had a look on the web at some news items related to life cycle assessment. So here's one example that Gore-Tex released, a week or two ago, how they changed their increasing the use of recycled face fabric textiles to improve the environmental performance on their range, and that's based on life cycle assessment. So you can see how the results of life cycle assessment actually influence company policy in terms of, okay, we really need to work on this type of material use and this type of recyclability based on that data. Again, the Corrugated Packaging Alliance in America released a report showing the environmental progress of their industry. So this is an example where they've actually been tracking the environmental progress of the corrugated packaging industry over from 2006 to 2014. And through that process, they're able to actually track and demonstrate an improved performance of the whole industry. And then I think this is the last one that I pulled out, a eco-design example where Mars, after doing life cycle assessments of single-use fresh packs pouch, they managed to zoom in on some of the hotspots, some of the big impact areas, to reduce the carbon footprint of that packaging by 31%. So this is an example where they've taken the life cycle assessment data and results and actually fed that back into the design process to improve their product. So it is used. So in the eco-design side of things, so once we've taken that picture, how do we actually improve the picture? Life cycle assessment is a really important tool for avoiding burden shifting. So maybe a solution that, we want to make this product recyclable might reduce the end of life impact, but that might push up impact at manufacture or use, etc., that might be more important than the impact you're saving at the end of life, and that can happen between different impact categories as well. Some of the results I showed you just prior, the communication message is often reported in carbon because that tends to be what people understand best, but often when you scratch the surface behind the scenes, they are actually looking at multiple indicators, not just carbon. So some important aspects of life cycle thinking. You're not just looking at end of pipe. It's not just what you see. It's not just. A lot of people get really upset about the waste question because that's the most visible part often of what we see in terms of environmental degradation. But they forget that there's this whole of life behind that that is to consider as well. We're going from a site or a spatial approach to understanding environmental impacts across our whole supply chain, so not just in one part of the world, and also going from problem to problem to systems thinking. So we're not just looking at, oh, hang on, we don't like that material, so we're going to improve that, and we like recycled materials, so we're going to just use the recycled materials. It's not a checklist type approach. It's really understanding the problem in its entirety. Life cycle thinking fits into a whole suite of tools that we refer to as life cycle management. which includes business case for sustainability, different systems and procedures. We talked about ISO standards before. There's things around quality, design for sustainability, and there's a whole suite of tools and techniques that can be used to inform that as well. So I've talked a lot about life cycle assessment. There's also life cycle costing for the monetary side of that, and a whole suite of other sort of technical tools that feed in the information flows around that. I wanted to just do a couple of slides around the circular economy because I think it's a very important notion, and I personally think that life cycle thinking is an excellent springboard to understanding the circular economy, and that the two approaches are friends and not foes. So once we've understood the real life cycle impact of a product or a service, it means we've really mapped out that supply chain, and we're already getting a sophisticated understanding of how this thing works in the economy. So it's a really good place to start to look at how do we connect the different parts. I sort of liken it to, you can do a very simple life cycle assessment comparing, packaging A to packaging B, where you've just changed a material. But if you want to push it further and have a look at, okay, so how do you bring that packaging material back, and what are the systems to get it flowing better? That's when you're starting to get into the more circular economy mindset. So the definition of the circular economy is an economy that is restorative by design, keeping products, components and materials at their highest utility and value for the optimal duration. I'm hoping we'll get some questions about this later, but there's several notions in there that if you unpack them actually work really well with life cycle thinking. We talk about keeping them at their highest utility for the optimal duration. We're not just encouraging to have a closed system that you recycle, and if you're making carpets, it always has to come back as carpets, for example, and that same piece of nylon, even if it gets sent to a country very far away, we have to go run and grab it back and put it into the same manufacturing system. It's bigger than that. It's about optimizing the duration of how you get that materials back as well. Sometimes it's just not worth it to recycle things anymore. They've become too diffused in the environment and things like that. So it's not, I really challenge anyone that says the circular economy is just about recycling things to death. I really don't believe that's so. And this is the framework that's often put forward around the circular economy. So the Ellen MacArthur refers to this as the butterfly diagram. And this, once again, I showed a very simplistic sort of way that things cycle back in this slide. And if we have a look at the sort of recycling, remanufacture, refurbish, repair, we're really thinking about sort of technosphere objects. So machinery and metal goods, things like that, which come into the technical material side of the butterfly diagram. So what are all the strategies that we can use to keep a product running for as long as possible? How can we maintain the life of that product, keep it circulating more? Then, if one person's finished using it, how can we give it to someone else for them to reuse it? And then if we need to start breaking that down into components and refurbishing and remanufacturing and way down to recycling. But then you've also got the biological materials side of things. So how can you cascade biological materials so that you're getting nutrients and energy back into the natural environment? So that's the real regenerative aspect. So when you look at, large-scale composting systems, for example, rather than food waste going to landfill or ending up in incineration, you're actually getting a product that's bringing nutrients back to the soil and actually regenerating the natural side of things. I'll just quickly present two examples of this that I really love. This is a Belgian company called Nof, Nearly New Office Furniture. And what they do is they go into big banks and government agencies and things like that, that when they need to do a complete furniture refurbishment, rather than just ditching the old desks and dumping them or selling them for cheap on the second-hand market. They actually completely redesign it. So they use all the materials. They're transforming old office furniture into absolutely gorgeous, stylish, well-designed, new-looking office furniture, and they actually undertake a carbon assessment each project they do, and they give that to the client as well. So they are economically competitive. They're often cheaper than buying new, plus they get that carbon benefit from their designs. And then the other one I really love is in the Netherlands. This is a company called Bundles, which is trying to bring product as a service to households. So rather than, like what we do with photocopiers now, small businesses don't buy photocopiers anymore. We hire them, we pay per copy. This is a way that individual household holders can access high-end, good quality laundry machines, and they pay per wash, basically. But the startup that Bundles, that's running the system, has actually developed the technology around being able to count the number of washes and being able to detect when the machine needs servicing. So they actually are a high-tech company. They're a finance company because they're, putting these machines in people's homes, and they have access that they pay that back slowly. And they're a maintenance company that keep those machines running optimally as long as they can. So that was my roundabout introduction to all things life cycle thinking. I think I'd like to open it up for questions now, if that's okay, Philip. I'm hoping that people actually managed to follow correctly with the technical challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jody, for this overview and really nicely sort of tying together different elements of what encompasses the life cycle. All the way up to circular economy, which is certainly a buzzword these days in many circles. And so it's really good to see that you've made that sort of a process clear, and there are various elements that can fall into play here, including the overall sort of life cycle thinking perspective. With that said, as Jody just mentioned, we're looking forward to your questions. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to type away in our little chat window, which you get if you click on the speech bubble. And then I'll be happy to moderate the questions that you might have. In the meantime, while you type away, maybe because we ended on the circular economy notion, and we just published our latest workshop report. That was exactly on what Jody mentioned, essentially that circular economy, if it is understood in the realm of taking a life cycle perspective, is a very valuable approach. And we outlined a little bit the challenges, but also the opportunities of how the different approaches can work together or be aligned, which is what we're working on. So with that said, any questions? Okay, so I get a question from Jim, and he wants to know whether you can outline a little bit more on the lifecycle management part. So how that, maybe you can go back to
doing that, the big cheat. Come on, Jim, talk. Sorry, lifecycle management. So lifecycle management is really a really large suite of tools that a company can use to improve their environmental performance of not just their site. So traditional environmental management systems, for example, for companies really look at what they manage on their different sites around the world, and not necessarily the impacts that they're having related to the products that they might be pumping out and that are used by different people around the world. So it's really understanding, and also upstream the supply chain management as well. So just because it's not happening within the business's physical boundaries doesn't mean you can't have influence over what's going on. So I find that a really interesting aspect of life cycle management, that a company, a multinational, for example, needs to track up its supply chain to understand what impacts could be happening in different parts of the world, because they can actually plot out as well where those impacts are coming from in the supply chain. Are they sourcing a lot of textiles from India, and are there specific water impacts related to that, for example, and then right down to their customers. So the example with Levi's, where they recognise that not all their impact is in their hand, and how do they interact with customers around that. So I find that the sort of interesting side of life cycle management, that it can help the company really understand and manage their material environmental impacts a lot better than a sort of simple checklist approach, I guess.
Right. Okay.
Add anything to that, Philip or Jim?
Let's see what I can.
And it's interesting because the toolbox is so extensive between the sort of the technical side of understanding what those impacts are, and the different sort of systems and kind of strategies that you can put in place to improve things, around eco-labelling and designing for sustainability and things like that.
Right. So Jim's happy with your answer. So anyone else who's come up with a question in the meantime, also please feel free to either type it up in the chat window or unmute yourself and ask it right away.
Julia might need to unmute if she's on the telephone.
Yeah, I think she's unmuted. So, anyone, guys? Or was it also clear that you don't have any questions? I doubt that. There's a lot of technical aspects involved that you might want to know more about it.
And this is why I hate webinars. Because usually I do this with real people, and I can go and tap you on the head and say, "Come on, what did you think?"
Exactly. So in the meantime, maybe from your experience, while we still give people a chance to come up with a question, you're working in. Okay, here we have a question.
Yay!
Yay! So, is it possible to have a bit more information about the allocation system when doing an LCA?
How would you be on answering that, Philip?
Sorry?
Would you be able to help me out with that one?
With the allocation system?
Yeah, because there's a lot of different, your economic allocations and things like that, and I'm not up on all of them.
Well, I probably maybe we can bring Jim in if he would like to come in. Hold on, I'll unmute Jim. Jim, would you? Would you be able to help out on this one, like going into a little bit more information with regards to the allocation system when doing an LCA?
And perhaps if you could explain the question a bit better, are you thinking more about sort of economic versus material type allocations, or are you thinking more about when you've got a recycling scenario, where do the different impacts get allocated? There are quite a few different ways to enter allocation as a subject.
Well, let's see.
And Jim's not coming to my rescue here, is he? Thanks, Jim.
Well, maybe we'll wait for. Whoop. Jim, is that you?
Yeah, I'm sorry I was distracted. I'm on the way to a conference. Could you just repeat what the question was?
Okay, so the question is about having more information about the allocation system when doing an LCA.
I guess I'm not sure exactly how to answer standards, there are sort of guidelines for when certain allocations are appropriate. And I know the metals and mining industry have done considerable amount of work in coming up with decision rules about allocation rules, and that's all available. And if you want, we can provide that information to you, so you can read up exactly what those rules are and how you might answer some of the questions that you have in more detail.
Right, exactly. Okay.
I've just flicked down back to the slide that has, a couple of leads on the different standards around life cycle assessment, and also if you have a look at the EPD stuff that I put up earlier as well, every EPD is calculated based on a product category rule, and those product category rules also obviously have rules around allocation. I guess a really general response around allocation, very schematically, is basically around, so if you're using recycled products, you're using recycled paper pulp to make insulation products, for example. So that recycled paper has been used once already by the newsprint industry, for example, and allocation is really important to be careful that you're not doubling up where your environmental burdens are coming from, so where the negative impacts, if we say that all of the impacts of the production of that paper sits on the newsprint and all of the impact sits on when you're making the insulation material, that's doubling up on your impact. So you're being a bit hard on yourself, basically. But you can't give everyone good points every time either. So if the newsprint LCA is saying, oh, well, all our newspapers are recyclable, so we get all the points back for that. And then the recycling industry is saying, oh, but that was already used on the market, so we're going to get all the benefits of taking that out of the waste market. That's when you have to start playing around with the allocation. So that was the general waffly answer about allocation.
Right. Yeah, but I think for the sort of general purpose of understanding how it works, it's fine. Exactly. Okay, so moving on. Any other question from anyone? Oh, and before we got into that question, I wanted to ask you, Judy, because obviously you're doing this in Australia, but you've also experienced in France and working with companies. To what extent do you feel that this has been taken up by the industry? Like, I think one of our roles or our objective is to broaden the understanding and the knowledge among decision makers in general. But the question is really, in your perspective, what is the current status quo in terms of applied level of these approaches that we talked about today?
Well, it's tough. The Australian marketplace is a lot less mature than Europe. There's a lot less data available. There's a lot less full LCAs going on, really. But we still have a good database. There is industry take-up. It's not all bad. I think an interesting thing to consider actually is that a lot of industries. Thanks, Shulman. A lot of industries, once they've done like LCA on LCA on LCA, they've kind of learned, if they're just doing it for eco-design, if they're just doing it to try to improve their processes and they don't necessarily want to communicate all the environmental impacts of their products because their customers don't care that much. Once they've done it a couple of times, they've kind of learnt a lot of lessons that they need to know. So you see them backing off. Unless they're really tracking year on year exactly what the environmental impact is and how it shifts, as soon as they change a supplier. I just think it's an interesting concept that often they can learn the lessons they need to know from LCA after a couple of years, and then that's when it gets interesting that it sort of goes more into the management systems. They've learnt that there's certain materials that are important, so they put indicators and KPIs around that. So sometimes just because a company is not doing full LCAs doesn't mean it's actually not mature in life cycle thinking.
Right. Okay, fair enough. So there's some hope.
Yeah.
So, guys, last chance. If you don't have any questions anymore, we'll let Jody go. Exactly. So let me know if anything has remained unclear. Otherwise, feel free to get in touch with us if you still have some open questions or would like to get some pointers on where to read up on some of the things that were mentioned during the webinar. The webinar has also been recorded, so we'll put that on probably our YouTube channel, and then you can check it out there and go back to Jody's slides. But I feel that there are no further questions. So then, let me thank you all for participating. Thank you, Jody, for taking the time and sharing your overview with us today. And yeah, if you would like to know more about the general concept, feel free to get in touch with us or write Jody, and we'll look forward to engaging with you then if you like. And otherwise, I wish you a fantastic day or evening, depending on where you are. Thank you very much for joining.
Thanks, everyone.